Montana Territory, 1876. The last rays of sunlight painted the mountainside gold as a lone rider crested the ridge. Beneath him, the untamed wilderness stretched toward the horizon, beautiful and deadly. Thomas Lowell tugged his hat lower, scanning the jagged terrain for signs of pursuit. At 26, he had already learned what most men twice his age never would. In this untamed country, trust was a luxury he could not afford. His lean, muscular frame sat easy in the saddle, the product of years working cattle across 3 territories. Despite the trail dust coating his clothes, there was a certain handsomeness to his features, strong jawline shadowed with 2 days of stubble, clear blue eyes that missed nothing, and a mouth that rarely smiled. The worn Colt revolver at his hip had saved his life more times than he cared to count. "Just you and me now, Rusty," he murmured to his chestnut gelding. "Better that way." The horse nickered softly in response, as if disagreeing. Thomas ignored it. 5 years riding the frontier had taught him hard lessons. Men died out here usually because they relied on others. Partnerships meant vulnerability. Love meant weakness. The frontier was no place for soft hearts, only survivors. 2 more days to Virginia City, he said, calculating the distance. The payment for delivering the cattle to the Blackwater Ranch would set him up for months. Then he'd move on. He always did. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and Thomas frowned. A storm this time of year could turn deadly fast. He'd need shelter soon. Turning his horse toward a stand of pines, he couldn't know that the approaching tempest would be the least of his worries, or that it would change his life forever. The first drops hit his shoulders as he led Rusty through the thickening trees, searching for suitable cover. Then he heard it, the unmistakable crack of a rifle. Thomas reacted instantly, throwing himself from the saddle as the bullet splintered bark inches from his head. "Damn outlaws," he muttered, drawing his revolver and pressing his back against a thick trunk. The Gallows gang had been prowling these parts for months. He'd hoped to avoid them, but luck was never on his side. 3 more shots rang out, and Thomas returned fire, counting bullets. When silence fell, he risked a glance around the tree. No movement, just the increasing drumbeat of rain. Taking a chance, he whistled for Rusty, who'd bolted at the gunfire. No answering when he came. "Perfect," he growled, feeling the first true twinge of worry. Without his horse and supplies, his odds in the wilderness plummeted. The rain turned violent as night descended, forcing Thomas to scramble through the darkness. The terrain grew treacherous, the ground slick with mud. Then disaster struck, a misstep on a rain-slick outcropping, a moment of weightlessness, then pain as he tumbled down a steep ravine. His world exploded in agony as his leg twisted beneath him, then darkness claimed him. Consciousness returned with the sharp jab of something hard against his ribs. "You dead, mister?" a voice asked, female, young. Thomas forced his eyes open, blinking against morning light. Standing above him was a vision that made him wonder if he'd died after all. A young woman, perhaps 20 years old, studied him with wary green eyes. Her honey-blonde hair was tied back in a practical braid, but loose tendrils framed a face of striking beauty. She wore a simple blue calico dress with a worn leather jacket that appeared too large for her slender frame. In her hands, she held a rifle pointed steadily at his chest. "Not dead," he managed through cracked lips, "though I'm reconsidering the benefits." She didn't smile. "You're on Morgan property." "State your business." Thomas tried to sit up, then hissed as pain lanced through his leg. "No business. Lost my horse after some outlaws took shots at me. Then this ravine decided to rearrange my leg." Her gaze flickered to his twisted limb, then back to his face. Something like sympathy crossed her features before she masked it. "Outlaws, you say, the Gallows gang. Didn't stay to exchange introductions." After a moment of consideration, she lowered her rifle slightly. "I'm Madeline O'Connor. This is my father's land." "Thomas Lowell," he replied, then winced as another wave of pain hit. "I'd tip my hat if I knew where it went." Madeline glanced around, as if expecting more riders to appear. "Can you stand? With help, maybe." She hesitated, then slung her rifle over her shoulder and extended her hand. "My cabin's not far. I can't leave you out here for the wolves, or worse." Thomas stared at her offered hand. Every instinct warned against accepting help, against owing anyone. Dependency was dangerous, but a night in the open with a broken leg would be a death sentence. "I'll repay the kindness," he said stiffly, taking her hand. "See that you do," she replied, her expression unreadable as she helped him to his feet. The journey to Madeline's cabin was an exercise in agony. Each step sent shards of pain through Thomas's leg, but he refused to complain. The young woman moved with confidence through the wilderness, occasionally supporting his weight when the terrain demanded it. He noted how she frequently scanned their surroundings, her hand never far from her weapon. "You always this cautious?" he asked through gritted teeth. "You survive out here by expecting trouble," she answered without looking at him. "Something tells me you understand that principle well enough." He couldn't argue with that assessment. The cabin appeared as they crested a small rise, a solid structure of hewn logs with a stone chimney, nestled in a protected clearing. A small corral stood nearby, holding 3 horses. Thomas noted with surprise that one was rusty. "Your horse showed up last night," Madeline explained, following his gaze. "Figured his owner might be nearby." "Smart animal," Thomas murmured. "Smarter than his rider, clearly." For the first time, Madeline's lips quirked in what might have been a smile. "Let's get you inside before that leg decides to fall off completely." The cabin's interior was modest but well-maintained. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, while simple furniture crafted from local timber filled the space. Thomas noted only one bed against the far wall, with a curtain that could be drawn for privacy. "You live here alone?" he asked as she helped him to a chair near the hearth. Madeline's expression clouded. "I do now. My father died last winter, influenza." "I'm sorry." She shrugged. So were the men from town who thought a woman alone would be easy pickings for her land. They've learned otherwise. Thomas watched as she gathered supplies, clean cloths, a basin of water, and a bottle of what looked like whiskey. "You're going to need to remove those trousers so I can set that leg," she said matter-of-factly. He raised an eyebrow. "Forward, aren't you? Would you prefer gangrene? I've helped the doctor in Virginia City. I know what needs doing." Thomas couldn't argue with her logic, though the situation went against every boundary he'd maintained for years. With her assistance, he managed to remove his boots and trousers, keeping his modesty with a blanket she provided. The examination of his leg revealed a clean break below the knee. "This will hurt," she warned, positioning her hands. "Not my first broken bone," he replied, then nearly bit through his lip as she said it with quick, efficient movements. As she wrapped his leg tightly with strips of cloth, Thomas studied her. "Most women would have left me to die, or sent for a man to help." Madeline's hands never paused in their work. "Most women haven't been alone in the wilderness since they were 16. My father taught me to rely on myself, not the kindness of others." "Smart man." "He was," she agreed. "Taught me to shoot, hunt, and defend what's mine. Said the frontier doesn't care if you're a man or woman when it tries to kill you." When she finished, she stood and wiped her hands on her apron. "You'll need to stay off that leg for at least 3 weeks. I'll make up a pallet for you by the fire." Thomas frowned. "I can't stay here that long. I need to get to Virginia City." "I have business." "Business that will have to wait unless you want to be a one-legged cowboy for the rest of your shortened life," she cut in. "The choice is yours, Mr. Lowell, but I won't help you to your horse just so you can fall off and undo my work." Their gazes locked in silent challenge, neither willing to yield. Finally Thomas sighed. 3 weeks, then I'm gone. I won't be a burden." "See that you aren't," she replied. "I've got enough troubles without adding a stubborn cowboy to them." As night fell, Thomas watched Madeline move about the cabin, preparing a simple but hearty stew. Her efficiency spoke of years of self-reliance. Despite his misgivings about staying, he found himself studying her movements, noting the quiet strength in her slender frame. "Why are you out here alone?" he asked as she handed him a bowl. "Surely you have family somewhere." Madeline sat on a chair across from him, her own bowl balanced on her lap. "None that would claim me. My father was Irish, my mother Cheyenne. When she died, he brought me east, then kept moving until we found this place. Said it was far enough from everyone that our business would remain our own." The revelation explained her unique beauty, the golden skin, high cheekbones, and the remarkable green eyes that seemed to hold secrets. Thomas had known mixed-blood children often faced hostility from both worlds. "And now," he asked. "Now I keep what he built," she said simply. "This land is all I have." Thomas nodded, understanding territory that was worth defending. They ate in silence for a while until Madeline spoke again. "Those men who shot at you, they're getting bolder. The Gallows Gang has been terrorizing homesteaders for months. Sheriff can't catch them or doesn't try hard enough." "You think they'll come here?" Her gaze was steady. "I know they will. They want everyone out. Someone's paying them, someone who wants this whole valley." Thomas digested this information, his customary wariness returning. "Then I'm bringing trouble to your door by staying." Trouble was already on its way, she replied, rising to take his empty bowl. At least now there's 2 guns instead of 1. Later, as he lay on the pallet she'd prepared, Thomas stared at the ceiling, listening to Madeline's even breathing from behind the curtain. The pain in his leg had dulled to a persistent throb, but another discomfort had taken root, the unfamiliar feeling of obligation. He'd spent years avoiding debts of any kind, especially the human variety. Connections were vulnerabilities. Yet here he was, dependent on a stranger who'd offered help without hesitation. 3 weeks, he murmured to himself, then we go our separate ways. But even as he spoke the words, something told him it wouldn't be that simple. The days that followed established an uneasy routine. Madeline rose before dawn to tend the animals and hunt if necessary. Thomas, chafing at his confinement, insisted on handling what chores he could manage, mending tack, cleaning weapons, and keeping the fire fed. Their conversations remained practical, focused on immediate needs rather than personal histories. A week into his stay, Thomas was whittling a piece of wood when Madeline returned from checking her traps, her expression troubled. "What is it?" he asked, noting her agitation. "Tracks," she said, hanging her rifle on pegs by the door. 5 riders circling the property, they're watching. Thomas set aside his carving, the gallows gang. "Most likely, they've been getting bolder since Jacob Thornton started buying up properties." Thornton, the man who owns the Blackwater Ranch, Thomas felt a chill. The very man he was supposed to deliver cattle to. Madeline's eyes narrowed. "You know him." Thomas hesitated, then admitted, "I was contracted to deliver a herd to his ranch." "That was my business in Virginia City." "Then you're working for the man who's trying to run everyone off their land," she said, her voice hardening. "The man who probably hired those outlaws to shoot you." "I was hired to move cattle, not drive off settlers," Thomas protested. "I've never even met Thornton." Madeline paced the small cabin. "It doesn't matter, he wants this whole valley. 3 families have already sold and left after mysterious accidents, 2 more after direct threats. My father refused his offers for years." Thomas absorbed this information, pieces falling into place. "And now you're alone, a prime target." "Yes, though they'll find I'm not so easily frightened." She stopped pacing to look at him directly. "Where do you stand in this, Mr. Lowell?" It was a fair question. Thomas had spent years avoiding entanglements in other people's problems. The frontier was filled with land disputes and power struggles. Staying neutral kept him alive and employed. "I stand on my own 2 feet, or will once this leg heals," he said carefully. "I don't take sides in other people's battles." Disappointment flickered across her face. "Then we understand each other. Once you're healed, you're free to complete your business with Thornton and forget you ever met me." Something about her dismissal stung more than it should have. Before he could respond, she'd grabbed her rifle again. "I need to check the western boundary. The horses are restless." After she left, Thomas dragged himself to the window, watching her stride purposefully into the trees. The woman was either remarkably brave or foolish to face such dangers alone, yet she'd survived this long without him or anyone else. The thought shouldn't have bothered him as much as it did. That night Thomas was awakened by Madeline's hand over his mouth. Her finger pressed against her lips, warning him to silence. Outside, voices carried on the night air, men, at least 3, approaching the cabin. "Gallows gang," Thomas whispered when she removed her hand. She nodded, passing him his revolver. 4 of them, they've been watching the cabin since sunset. Thomas pulled himself up, ignoring the pain in his leg. "You have a rifle for me." Without hesitation, she retrieved a second weapon from beneath her bed. "Can you shoot with that leg?" "I can manage." He positioned himself by one window while she took the other. "What's the plan?" "Stay alive," she said simply. "They'll try to burn us out." As if confirming her words, a male voice called from the darkness. "Miss O'Connor, we know you're in there. Mr. Thornton's offer still stands. Leave now with what you can carry, and nobody gets hurt." Madeline didn't respond, only checked her rifle's ammunition. Thomas recognized the calculating look on her face. She was waiting for them to make their move, to reveal their positions. "This is your last warning," the voice continued. "We're authorized to take possession by any means necessary." The stillness that followed was broken by the sound of movement in the darkness. Thomas caught glimpses of shadowy figures circling the cabin, then came the unmistakable smell of kerosene. "They're going to torch it," Thomas whispered. "When I fire, head for the root cellar," Madeline instructed. "Trapdoor behind you, under the rug." Before Thomas could protest, she fired through the window. A cry of pain confirmed she'd hit one of the attackers. Immediately, bullets peppered the cabin walls as the remaining men returned fire. Go. Madeline shouted, continuing to provide covering fire. Thomas hesitated only a moment before pulling back the rug to reveal the trapdoor. His instinct was to flee alone. He'd survived this long by putting himself first. But something stronger made him grab Madeline's arm, pulling her toward the escape route. Together or not at all, he insisted. For once, she didn't argue. They descended into the darkness just as flames began to lick at the cabin's outer walls. The root cellar, connected to a narrow tunnel that Madeline explained breathlessly, led to a small cave behind the property. My father was paranoid about being trapped, she said as they crawled through the passage, Thomas gritting his teeth against the pain in his leg. Built this the first year we arrived. Smart man, Thomas grunted, feeling a new appreciation for her father's foresight. They emerged into the crisp night air 100 yards from the cabin, which was now fully engulfed in flames. The sight of Madeline's home burning struck Thomas harder than expected. Everything she owned, everything she'd fought to protect, gone. I'm sorry, he said softly. Madeline's face was illuminated by the distant firelight, her expression a mixture of grief and fury. This isn't over. We need to get to the old mining cabin. We can regroup there. Thomas questioned. This isn't my fight, Madeline. She turned to him, her green eyes reflecting the flames. They shot at you before you ever met me, Thomas. You were delivering cattle to the man who just burned down my home. Whether you like it or not, you're already in this fight. The truth of her words sank in. He'd been dragged into this conflict from the moment those first shots were fired at him in the forest. The realization should have angered him. He'd spent years avoiding such entanglements. Instead, a strange sense of clarity washed over him. Then we'd better get moving, he said. Those men will be looking for bodies when the fire dies down. With Madeline's help, Thomas limped through the forest. His broken leg protested every step, but the alternative, leaving her to face these dangers alone, was suddenly unthinkable. When had his priorities shifted so dramatically? The mining cabin was little more than a shack, hidden in a fold of the mountains where Madeline's father had once prospected. It contained basic supplies, some preserved food, blankets, and ammunition. Thomas collapsed on a rough pallet, exhaustion and pain overwhelming him. Rest, Madeline said, checking his leg. The bandages held, but you've strained it badly. What will you do now? He asked, watching as she organized their meager supplies. She paused, her hands stilling. The only thing I can do, fight back. Thornton thinks he can drive me off my land. He'll learn otherwise. You can't take on Thornton and his hired guns alone, Thomas protested. I'm not alone anymore, she said, her eyes meeting his, unless you're planning to crawl away at first light. The challenge in her voice was clear. Thomas had spent years drifting, avoiding attachment, convinced that survival meant independence. Yet in this moment, faced with Madeline's courage and determination, his lifelong philosophy seemed hollow. I'll stay, he found himself saying. At least until that leg heals, he added, maintaining a pretense of detachment. Madeline's expression softened slightly. Then we should get some sleep. Tomorrow will come early. As they settled into the cramped cabin, Thomas found himself hyper-aware of Madeline's presence just a few feet away. The woman was unlike any he'd ever known, fierce yet vulnerable, determined yet practical. She'd saved his life twice now, and instead of feeling burdened by the debt, he felt something entirely different. Something that both terrified and exhilarated him. Dawn brought a grim assessment of their situation. They had limited supplies, one functioning pair of legs between them, and enemies who believed them dead, their only advantage. We need to get word to the sheriff, Thomas suggested as Madeline prepared a sparse breakfast. She laughed bitterly. Sheriff Dobbs, he's in Thornton's pocket, has been for years. Then the federal marshal in Virginia City, Thomas persisted. This is organized intimidation, maybe murder if they find us. That's federal jurisdiction. Madeline considered this. The marshal might listen, but we need proof. It's my word against Thornton's, and he's the richest man in the territory. Thomas thought for a moment, what if we could get a confession? Something in writing that proves Thornton is behind the Gallows gang. And how would we manage that? The same way they plan to drive you out, by making them think they've won. Over the next several days, they refined their plan. Madeline made brief excursions to gather intelligence, returning with news that the Gallows gang was celebrating their apparent success at the saloon in town. Thornton had already sent surveyors to assess her property. Thomas's leg improved enough that he could move with a crude crutch Madeline fashioned. Each day brought them closer, their conversations extending beyond immediate survival to personal histories and aspirations. He learned that before her father's death, Madeline had dreamed of turning their homestead into a horse ranch, breeding the sturdy mountain stock she'd begun developing. "What about you?" she asked one night as they sat outside the cabin watching the stars. "What does Thomas Lowell want beyond his next job?" The question caught him off guard. He'd spent so many years focused on survival that the concept of wanting more seemed foreign. "I never thought that far ahead," he admitted. "Just staying alive and free seemed enough." "That's not living," she said softly. "That's just not dying." Her words lingered in his mind long after they'd retired for the night. He'd convinced himself that attachments were weaknesses, that caring for anyone or anything meant vulnerability. Yet watching Madeline fight for her land, for her father's legacy, he saw a strength in her commitment that his detachment had never provided him. 2 weeks after the burning of the cabin, they put their plan into motion. Thomas, his legs sufficiently healed to ride, would approach Thornton's ranch under the guise of completing his original contract. Meanwhile, Madeline would secure evidence from Thornton's office in town, ledgers showing payments to the Gallows gang. "This is too dangerous," Thomas argued as they prepared to separate. "If they recognize you." "They won't," she assured him, tucking her blonde hair beneath a hat and donning men's clothing. "I'll be just another ranch hand looking for work." Thomas wanted to protest further, but he recognized the determination in her eyes. Instead, he caught her hand. "Be careful." Something shifted in her expression, a softening that made his heart race. "You too, Cowboy." Their fingers lingered together a moment longer than necessary before they parted ways, each riding toward their assigned tasks. Thomas felt Madeline's absence immediately, a hollow sensation he couldn't remember experiencing before. When had she become so essential to his peace of mind? Blackwater Ranch sprawled across the valley, a testament to wealth and power. As Thomas approached the main house, he steeled himself for the performance ahead. He would present himself as the hired drover, unaware of recent events, inquiring about payment for the cattle he'd been unable to deliver due to his accident. Jacob Thornton proved to be exactly as Thomas had imagined, a corpulent man with cold eyes and an entitled manner. He received Thomas in his study, a glass of brandy in one hand. "Lowell, was it curious that you disappeared for nearly 3 weeks?" "The cattle were to be delivered by now." "Had an accident in the mountains," Thomas explained, gesturing to his still-splinted leg. "Took a fall during that storm, lucky to be alive." Thornton studied him with thinly veiled suspicion. "Indeed. And where have you been recuperating all this time?" "Found shelter with a trapper north of here," Thomas lied smoothly. "Only got back on my feet recently." "Unfortunate timing," Thornton mused. "I've already contracted another drover. Your services are no longer required." Thomas feigned disappointment. "I understand, sir, though I was counting on that payment to see me through winter." "Perhaps we can come to an arrangement," Thornton offered, his demeanor shifting. "I have other work that needs doing, work that requires discretion and a certain moral flexibility." "I'm listening," Thomas said, careful to mask his disgust. "There's been some resistance to my expansion plans," Thornton explained, refilling his glass. "Most of the troublemakers have been persuaded to sell, all except one, a half-breed woman who's likely perished in an unfortunate fire." Thomas's hand tightened on his crutch. "What do you need from me?" "Confirmation," Thornton said. "My men report the cabin burned to the ground, but no bodies were recovered. I need to be certain." "And if she survived?" Thornton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Then ensure she doesn't cause further problems." "The land is mine now, one way or another. I just prefer clean paperwork." "I understand," Thomas replied. "What's the payment?" They haggled over terms, Thomas committing to a thorough search of the property and resolution of any problems within 3 days. As he left the ranch, mounting his horse with careful movements, he felt both relief and disgust. He now had the evidence they needed, Thornton's direct instruction to eliminate Madeline. The rendezvous point was a secluded bend in the river, 3 miles from town. Thomas arrived first, anxiety building with each passing hour. When Madeline finally appeared, riding hard through the trees, his relief was so profound it startled him. "Did you get it?" he asked as she dismounted. Her triumphant smile was answer enough. Ledger pages showing payments to each member of the Gallows gang, descriptions of services rendered that match exactly with the attacks on homesteaders. Thornton was sloppy, he thought no one would ever see these records. I got him to incriminate himself directly, Thomas added. Offered me money to confirm you were dead and to finish the job if you weren't. Madeline's expression hardened. Then we have what we need. The marshal can't ignore this evidence. They made camp by the river, planning to ride for Virginia City at first light. As darkness fell, Thomas found himself watching Madeline in the firelight, struck by her profile against the night sky. Something had fundamentally changed within him during these weeks together. The man who had arrived at her cabin, solitary, detached, convinced that connections were liabilities, was disappearing. "You're staring," Madeline noted without looking up from the fire. "Just thinking," he admitted, "about." Thomas hesitated, then decided honesty was the only path forward, "about how wrong I've been. For years, I convinced myself that surviving meant staying alone, that caring for anyone would get me killed out here." Madeline turned to face him, the firelight illuminating her features. "And now I'm not so sure that just surviving is enough anymore." Something vulnerable flickered in her eyes. "What are you saying, Thomas?" Before he could answer, the distinctive click of a gun hammer froze them both. "Ain't this touching?" drawled a voice from the darkness. "Seems Thornton was right to be suspicious." 4 men emerged from the trees, rifles trained on them. Thomas recognized the leader, Reed Gallows himself, a scar bisecting his face and hatred in his eyes. "The boss will be mighty interested to learn you two are not only alive but conspiring against him," Reed continued, gesturing for his men to secure their prisoners. Thomas met Madeline's gaze across the fire. Her expression was calm, determined, but he could read the calculation in her eyes. They would have one chance, if any. "Thornton sent me to find her," Thomas said, rising slowly with his hands visible. "I was bringing her in." Reed laughed. "Sure you were. That why you're cozied up by a campfire instead of marching her back to town." "Had to gain her trust," Thomas insisted. "She's been skittish since the fire." Madeline played along, her face transforming with apparent fear. "You bastard," she spat at Thomas. "I trusted you." Their performance created just enough confusion for Thomas to spot his opening. As 2 of the men moved toward Madeline, he lunged for his gun, shouting, "Now." Chaos erupted around the campfire. Thomas fired twice, dropping 1 man immediately. Madeline seized a burning branch from the fire, swinging it into another attacker's face before grabbing her rifle. Reed Gallows fired wildly, the bullet grazing Thomas's shoulder as he dove for cover. The firefight was brief but deadly. When silence fell again, 3 of the Gallows gang lay dead. Reed himself was wounded, cursing as he clutched his bleeding side. Madeline stood over him, rifle trained on his chest. "You burned my home," she said, her voice steady despite the violence they'd just survived. "You threatened my life on Thornton's orders." "Just following instructions," Reed gasped. "Thornton wants this whole valley. Said he'd hang us if we didn't clear everyone out." Thomas limped to Madeline's side, his own gun leveled at Reed. "You're going to tell that story to the marshal in Virginia City." "I ain't saying nothing," Reed growled. "Thornton will have me swinging before sundown." "You'll testify," Thomas insisted, "or I'll let her decide what happens to you right now." The look in Madeline's eyes must have convinced him, because Reed's defiance crumbled. "Fine. But I want protection." "You'll get a fair trial," Thomas promised, "which is more than you gave the people you drove from their homes." With Reed secured, they tended to Thomas's wound, a shallow graze that looked worse than it was. As Madeline wrapped a bandage around his shoulder, her fingers lingered against his skin. "That was a foolish risk," she chided softly. "You could have been killed." Thomas caught her hand in his. "Some things are worth the risk." Their eyes met, and the barrier that had kept Thomas emotionally distant for years finally crumbled. Without hesitation, he leaned forward and kissed her. Madeline responded with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck as years of isolation melted away for both of them. When they finally parted, breathless, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I've spent my life avoiding attachments, convinced they were weaknesses, but meeting you, loving you, it's made me stronger than I've ever been." Tears glistened in Madeline's eyes. "I thought I had to face everything alone. That needing someone meant failing my father's legacy. I was wrong too." Their journey to Virginia City the next day was tense but uneventful. Reed Gallows, under guard and in pain, proved eager to save himself by implicating Thornton. The federal marshal, a stern-faced man named Harkins, listened to their evidence with increasing gravity. Land fraud, intimidation, conspiracy to commit murder, Marshal Harkins summarized, reviewing the ledger pages. This is enough to put Thornton away for years. I'll send men to arrest him immediately. The trial that followed became the sensation of the territory. Jacob Thornton, once the most powerful man in the valley, watched his empire crumble as victim after victim came forward with stories of threats and violence. Reed Gallo's testimony, combined with the financial records, left no doubt of Thornton's guilt. Throughout the proceedings, Thomas never left Madeline's side. Their ordeal had forged something neither had believed possible, a partnership built on trust, respect, and deepening love. As autumn painted the mountains gold and crimson, they stood together on Madeline's land, surveying the foundation of her new cabin. It will be larger than the original, Thomas noted, examining the layout. Room for expansion. Madeline smiled up at him. I was hoping you might have some thoughts on that. I hear there's a skilled cowboy looking for a permanent position, one who knows horses and isn't afraid of hard work. Thomas drew her into his arms. I might know someone, though I should warn you, he's looking for more than just employment. Is that so? She murmured, her eyes sparkling. What exactly is he seeking? A partner, Thomas said softly, a home. A future that's about more than just surviving. Madeline's answer was a kiss that promised all those things and more. As the sun set behind the mountains that had nearly claimed his life, Thomas Lowell finally understood what he'd been missing in his years of solitary wandering. The frontier wasn't meant to be faced alone. Its harshest lessons were teaching him the value of connection, of building something lasting in a transient world. That winter, as snow blanketed the valley in pristine white, Thomas and Madeline were married in Virginia City. Their new cabin stood completed on the rise overlooking the valley, built stronger than the one that had burned. Inside, preparations for spring breeding season were already underway, the foundation of the horse ranch Madeline had always dreamed of creating. On a clear February morning, Thomas stood on their porch, watching Madeline work with a spirited yearling in the corral. Her skill with horses remained unmatched, her patience and determination evident in every movement. He marveled at how thoroughly his life had transformed in less than a year, from a solitary drifter to a man with roots, purpose, and a love he'd never thought possible. When she finished the training session, Madeline joined him on the porch, her cheeks flushed from exertion and cold. What are you thinking about, looking so serious? She asked, slipping her arm around his waist. Thomas pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. About how close I came to missing this. If those outlaws hadn't shot at me, if I hadn't fallen into that ravine. If I hadn't decided to check my property line that morning, she added with a smile. Perhaps fate has more wisdom than we gave it credit for. Perhaps, he agreed, looking out over the land they now shared. Or perhaps some lessons can only be learned the hard way, stranded in the wild, forced to depend on someone else for survival. Madeline reached up to trace the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. And what lesson did Thomas Lowell learn? He turned to her, all his love evident in his gaze. That the very thing I feared most, needing someone, loving someone, wasn't my weakness after all. It was the strength I'd been missing all along. As snow began to fall again, gentle flakes drifting around them, Thomas and Madeline Lowell stood together on the porch of their mountain home. The dangers that had brought them together had passed, but the love discovered among those perils remained, stronger than fear, more enduring than solitude, a testament to what could be built when two hearts found each other against all odds in the untamed West.